Excellent. All right, great. Good morning, everyone. Mike Skelton from the Greater Manchester Chamber. I want to welcome you to today's forum on diversity, equity, and inclusion. On behalf of the Chamber, we're really excited to offer today's program and want to give a big thanks to our moderator, James, and our panelists, who you'll meet in just a little bit. Have a few housekeeping items to get to before we dive into the program, but also wanted to share a few comments on behalf of the Chamber that this is a really important topic, and we're really pleased to be able to participate in providing this conversation and to have such a great response from our members in the community and interest in it. And I think we view this program as a first step, and that there could be a lot of great follow-on activities and meetings and conversations that come from today. And the reason why we see this as important, and this is based on conversations with so many of our members, with our board of directors, our leadership in our community, is that I think there's a broad recognition that diversity is a key to shaping an equitable, stable, and prosperous community and business environment. And the Chamber is really committed to being a partner in helping move the needle on that issue. And we look forward to some of the ideas and suggestions that are brought forward today on how the Chamber can participate going forward, whether it's advocacy or amplifying voices or projects, initiatives, agendas. And as I said, we don't see today's conversation as a one-off event. It's a first in what we hope are many other discussions. And while we hope to be a facilitator of today's program and a convener, this is not an area where our Chamber has been active in the past. And so we really want to learn from the experts in our community and the stakeholders who are active in this, and forge some consensus on how we can best play a role as a Chamber and as a business community. We're also going to be distributing a survey afterwards to collect your feedback, ideas, inspiration, and we would really value your input on that as we kind of shape next steps and what role we can best play and how we can continue the conversation. So again, thank you to James and our panelists for participating. I'm excited for you to hear from them. And thank you all for your interest and for participating in this really important conversation. Few housekeeping items. If everyone again could remain muted when you're not speaking, and if you want to raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature or the chat to ask questions. You can also rename yourself to identify what organization you're with. We would also recommend enabling speaker view, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen, so that you're able to stay focused on who is speaking during today's program. We're going to be recording today's presentation, and it will be available afterwards. We've actually had lots of requests for people who couldn't join us this morning, but were interested in participating after the fact or viewing after the fact. So that will be available, and probably available on the Chamber's YouTube channel, and so you can share it within your organization. I think that would be a really helpful outcome from today's event. That wraps up housekeeping. I do want to thank our sponsors for their continued support of the Chamber and allowing the Chamber to offer programs like this during really unprecedented times and challenging times. We really enjoyed being able to offer virtual programs of all different shapes and sizes. So thank you to our sponsors. I want to recognize our presenting sponsors today, Citizens and SNHU, our corporate sponsors, Any Property Rehab and Fidelity Investments, and our advocate sponsors, Wells Fargo and Manchester Boston Regional Airport. And I'd like to welcome now one of our sponsors to welcome us and say a few words. I'd like to welcome Carrie Harrison on behalf of Citizens to share a few sponsor remarks. Carrie?
Thanks, Mike. Citizens is really proud to be a sponsor of today's event. Clearly, this is one of the most important topics folks are engaging in right now. And during a time when all of us have faced significant challenges, I'm really inspired by this meaningful conversation and the actions that are being taken to address the inequalities within our community. So in line with these courageous conversations, I'm also really pleased to announce today that Citizens is partnering with two really important organizations here in the Manchester area. The Manchester NAACP, led by James McKim, and the Center for Women and Enterprise, which is led by Chandra Reber, to create a directory of minority and women-owned businesses here in New Hampshire. And our goal for this effort is really about raising awareness of these incredible businesses, but also to provide consumers and businesses with a tool that they can use to intentionally support these businesses and help them thrive here in the community. So over the next 6 months, we're all going to be working together on this project. We've had wonderful engagement as well with the Mayor's Multicultural Task Force in the state of New Hampshire to do this new statewide directory, and we're really excited about it. I hope all of you on the call today will join us in this effort and take part in that conversation, even including on social media. We're using a new hashtag called hashtag #PurchasePowerNH, and would love it if people would engage and shout out, their favorite women and minority-owned businesses and start drawing attention to this. So at this time, I really just want to say thank you, Michael, to you and your team at the Chamber for hosting this really important discussion. We're really pleased to be a part of it. And I'm looking forward, honestly, to the future when we can actually celebrate the positive impact of all of these local minority and women-owned businesses. And I'm really inspired to look forward really to better days to come. So thank you for this opportunity for us to participate, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Carrie. And again, thank you for your support. That's really exciting news. You look forward to hearing more about that initiative and any role we can play to support it. So let's dive right in. I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, James McKim. I have a little bit of background on James that I'd like to share first. James is the founder and managing partner of Organizational Ignition, a management consulting firm. He is a sought-after consultant, facilitator, speaker, and advisor, working with both private sector and public sector entities internationally in many industries to spark efficiency and growth through aligning people, process, and technology. Believing strongly in giving back to the community, Mr. McKim has facilitated startup and growth of statewide organizations such as the Economic Vitality New Hampshire and Software Association of New Hampshire. He's played an active role in the shaping of public policy affecting the technology industry. He serves currently on several boards, including chair of the New Hampshire PBS Finance Committee, chair of the Episcopal Church National Executive Council Committee on Anti-Racism, and president of the Manchester NAACP. James lives in Goffstown with his wife, Nancy, where he's an avid tennis player, cross-country skier, and digs singing vocals in the jazz band, the Episcocats. So James, thanks so much for being our moderator today, and really appreciate your partnership on this, and I'll hand the reins over to you.
Great, thank you, Mike, and thank you for this great opportunity to be part of what is, as Carrie said, a very important conversation that we all want to and need to have in the beginning of important conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion. So I'm hoping that folks can see my screen, and with that, want to launch into our DEI 101. So we really wanted to make sure everyone is on the same foundational page with the basics around diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that as we go through our efforts and these workshops and conversations, we have as many people as grounded at the same point as possible. And we recognize that everyone's at a different point in this journey in dealing with this very complex issue. So I always like to start off with a little bit of humor. but a little bit of humor that is related to the topic at hand. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at this little cartoon. So what I invite people to think about here is, what's the underlying message being sent? Think about that. Is it really the color of the tie? Or is there something else going on? And obviously there's something else going on that's being masked by the statement, sorry, my clients don't like the color of your tie. So this is why we're here. This is why we're doing this work, because this is happening in businesses all across the nation. So a little bit of how we got here, and I'm not going to go through this. This is just a great vision, a chart that came from the Washington Post. And it starts with the first slaves from Africa arriving actually in the Norfolk, Hampton, Virginia area, which is actually where my ancestors are from, over 400 years ago, before the Mayflower arrived at Plymouth Rock. And the presence of slaves from Africa was integrated into the earliest days of European colonization of what we now call the United States. Many recognized that slavery was wrong, and attempts to rectify the situation, which are shown in the chart, have happened throughout our history. Even though progress has been made toward equality, we're not there yet. Brookings Institute just earlier this year wrote that today the average white family has roughly 10 times the amount of wealth as the average Black family. Pew Research says 13 times. Black families in New Hampshire are 3.5 times more likely to live in poverty than white families. In terms of health disparities, which COVID-19 has laid bare, white people, who make up about 90% or 91.2% of the statewide population, make up only 73% of the cases of COVID. Black residents constitute 5.6% of the cases, although they make up only 1.4% of the population. Latinx residents make up 8.5% of the cases, even though they make up only 2.3% of the population. In the criminal justice system, Black and Hispanic people make up 9% of arrests, although they make up just 5% of the population. So even with the progress we've made, we still have these disparities. And I'm not going to go into the chart, but you can actually see some of the progress that has been made. Major milestones like the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Fair Housing Act in 73, but we've got a long way to go. So what about New Hampshire specifically? We continue to hear that New Hampshire is a predominantly white state. Is that really true? And is that the way we should be looking at this? Well, you can see that we're 91.2% white, but you really need to look at where you are. And so if you look at it from a city perspective, cities and towns perspective, we look at Manchester and Nashua, we see a slightly different picture, right? Not a dramatically different picture, but a slightly different picture. And particularly if you get hyper local, if you go into a certain community, a certain set of maybe 5 square blocks within Manchester, the picture's totally different. So we talk about statewide, but when we're looking at the impact of discrimination, we really need to get hyper local in focus. So Manchester here, you can see the population of Black or African American folks is closer to 6 or 7%. Asian Americans are about the same in Manchester. But look at Nashua, and particularly look at the Latino population in Nashua, much further there. So I just put this up to point out that you really want to look hyper-local. Don't just take the discussion about, well, New Hampshire's a white state and assume that that's the be-all and end-all of the statistics. So we talk about diversity. We use that term. What does it mean? Well, many people use the term to mean race or ethnicity, and race and ethnicity actually are two different things. Right? Some people use the term diversity and mean gender. Marilyn Lober from Johns Hopkins Institute in 1991 created what she called the diversity wheel. And it was a way that she put forth to attempt to describe the characteristics of individuals that make up our personality. And this is a version of that diversity wheel that actually was updated by Gardner, Schwartz, and Rao in 2009. But it's generally the same concept. So when we think about diversity, we're really talking about diverse internal dimensions or characteristics, which is shown on the internal section, which are characteristics we have that really don't change over our lives. So we're born on a date. We can't be born on a different date, different times of our lives. That's not going to change. We have a certain gender, and gender is actually, we can unpack gender even to include biological sex, gender identity, gender expression. So, but our gender doesn't generally change over our lifetimes. Our physical ability doesn't generally change over our lifetimes. We do acquire new skills, but our physical abilities don't really change dramatically. Our ethnicity does not change. Our race does not change. And then she talks about external dimensions or external characteristics, which are things that do change over time during our lives. So our income changes, our habits change, our ways of thinking can change. Our work experience, our appearances can change. And then we also talk about this organizational dimensions of how we interact with organizations with which we're affiliated. What is our function within an organization? Are we in sales? Are we in marketing? Are we a student? Are we a faculty? That makes up part of our personality. Are we a senior level person in an organization or a junior level person? Are we affiliated with a union? What's our standing in that union? So when we talk about diversity, we really want to talk about all these different characteristics of an individual. Because we know, and research has shown, that organizations that really embrace the broader definition of diversity and leverage it will outperform their peers. So if you want to, if you're a textual learner, here's a has some text definition from the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And you can quickly read that. So I know we're here to talk mostly about race, but I always want to put this in context of what diversity really means. So now I have a little clip for you, delving into race. Let's see, can I come back? And I lost the window, didn't come back up for some reason. Let's see. Apologies, we lost the video for a minute. Okay, let's see if that now comes back. There we go.
You may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you were of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the US needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent, but the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
So I invite you now to just type in the chat one word or two that struck you, or that articulates what struck you from that video. Just type it into the chat. Surprised, enlightened, charging perspective, use of race for power. Redlining, yes. Great. So really just want to get you thinking about the definition of race, because we throw that word around a lot, but we don't think about what it really means. I also want to talk a bit about equality versus equity. Those terms are used and sometimes used interchangeably, but they really are different. They really do mean something different. And I love using this cartoon to illustrate that fact. So think about this for a minute. Which one of these denotes equality? And which one of these denotes equity? Feel free to type in the chat. So the first panel is really representing equality. The three U's are being given an equal boost, right? To see over the fence, to see the game. The second one really represents equity. Each youth is being given what they need, equitable, to see over the fence. But what's this third one about? This third one, some people would say, is equity. Others would label this as justice. The difference being, in this third panel, the barrier, the boards, are removed. That's justice. And one of the things I like to think about here is this justice actually is cheaper than equity alone. Now, why is that? Why is it cheaper? Well, if we're removing the boards, we're removing the barrier, we no longer have to pay for maintenance of the barrier. And we don't have to pay for aid, right? So sometimes, and frequently, justice is actually cheaper, monetarily and spiritually. So there's equity versus equality. And then there's inclusion. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what's inclusion about? So this is a wordle that was crafted from surveys of people who were asked, what do you think of when you think of inclusion? We need to think about how we are including people. And again, if I go to the American Association of American Colleges and Universities, the definition is an active and intentional and ongoing engagement with diversity, with diverse people, referring back to that diversity wheel that we talked about. So we want you to think about what these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, mean as we go forth. There's some definitions of words that we use in this space, from generalization to stereotype to prejudice. We tend to, because of the way that our brains were created, we tend to generalize. We can't help it. It's the way we move through and process the millions of data input that we get through our five senses. So we have to generalize, we have to stereotype to be able to act quickly. But where things can go wrong is when we look at a person and evaluate them based on the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. By the color of someone's skin, you're getting an incomplete or distorted picture. That's the stereotype. When you apply a value judgment to that stereotype, then you're into the realm of prejudice. When you take action, you're being discriminatory. When you take action based on that prejudice, you're being discriminatory. And when you're using power to reinforce that discrimination, that's where the definition of an ism comes in. So we have racism, we have sexism, we have ageism. They're all about the power dynamic. So I want you to think about those dynamics in your organizations. Who has the power? Does everyone understand that stereotyping is not good? So one more thing to think about. As the video showed, racism and race is a social construct. We are socialized. We're not born racist. We're not born sexist. But society teaches us to be racist and sexist. So I don't want to go into this. This is a model that was developed by by Barbara Harrow in 1982. And it talks about how we're socialized, how we start with not knowing anything about isms, and we form our identities through what our parents teach us, what our relatives teach us. We begin our socialization. And then we get involved, become aware of and get involved in institutions. And our institutions are discriminatory. Right? So we learn that discrimination through how we interact within institutions. That knowledge is reinforced, and as we become more aware, we have choices as to how we live our lives. We can either recognize that discrimination is bad and do something to change, or we can do nothing and let the status quo continue. So with that, just that awareness is what I want you to take as we delve into the socialization aspect in this next conversation and in future conversations. And so we want to launch next. Well, first of all, let's see, are any questions, any quick questions around the foundations of DEI, the foundational concepts that we can answer before we launch into the panel? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the panel, and that's perfectly fine. As we said, we'll continue this discussion. I am so pleased, though, to have our panelists here with us, and I want to just do a quick introduction of each of them with whom I've had the pleasure of working over the past few years. First of all, Deo Mwano, who is a social impact innovator, whose work focuses on education, technology, business, community, and individual development. Deo earned his BA in International Relations and History and an MBA in Strategic Leadership. He's worked for the federal government and State Department. He's worked with nonprofits, with education institutions, and tech startups, ed tech and IoT security management firms. His honors include being named as an emerging leader to 40 under 40 here in New Hampshire, and some of you may have seen him recognized as such in 2016. And he's a graduate of the Leadership New Hampshire class of 2017. Deo runs his own consulting firm, Deo Mwano Consultancy.com, offering multidisciplinary services, speaking, training, creating, engaging empowerment content, leading workshops for businesses and nonprofits, and school integration, performing, and visual arts to ignite audience participation and ownership. And please, if you ever get a chance to see him in a workshop and how he incorporates dance and movement as our bodies are so important in this work, I encourage you to do that. Second, Shalamar Encarnacion, who is a first-generation born mixed Dominican, Venezuelan, and Egyptian mother of 3 and grandmother of 2. She doesn't look like a grandmother. Born in New York City and raised in Boston, she came with her family to Manchester in 2003. Shalimar served the southern New Hampshire area as a Spanish bilingual interpreter and translator since 2007, and has been involved in fighting for education freedom and equality for parents and students since 2013. She serves as a member of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation and the New Hampshire YWCA, and currently serves as the education co-chair of both the Greater Manchester NAACP and the Manchester Mayor's Cultural Advisory Council. In her downtime, she enjoys science fiction movies, reading, and dancing. There's a theme going on here around dancing. And last but not least, we have Victoria Adewumi. Victoria is a health equity leader, communicator, and organizer, supporting neighborhood-based interventions for community health and well-being. She works as the community liaison for the City of Manchester in the Manchester Health Department, and as part of the first class of trained community health workers in New Hampshire. Victoria works to link Manchester's families to greater social, physical, and environmental supports to facilitate self-empowerment. With over 10 years of experience leading grassroots immigrant and refugee-serving nonprofits, Victoria currently serves on the board of the Organization for Refugee and Immigrant Success and the New Hampshire Health and Equity Partnership. A New Hampshire native, Victoria holds a BA and MA in Political Science and International Affairs from the University of New Hampshire, and was recently named a Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Fellow, where she is currently pursuing a Master's of Public Health degree in the focus of adolescent health. So welcome to our panelists. And we're gonna have each of our panelists share their thoughts on 3 different questions. The first question is, where are you seeing the major, or what do you see as the major issues in your area of focus around diversity, equity, and inclusion? The second question is, what's a common misconception you see often around this topic? And the third is, what can businesses do in the effort to live into DEI in the area that you represent? So I want to kick it off with Deo to talk about small businesses and the great work he's been doing and bring that perspective to the group. Deo?
Hi, can you guys hear me? If you can hear me, just give me a little thumbs up. All right, super, great. I'm happy to be here with everyone. Thank you for inviting me to chat with you guys for a little bit. And I do have a video to share, but hopefully I'm going to be able to share real quick. But one of the things I want to touch on is that our experiences are very different from one another regarding where we congregate, where we we go and play, and where we go and eat food. And the unfortunate part sometimes is that we don't all have an opportunity to actually cultivate around the different experiences, the different cultures that are presented within the city that we live and work in. And with that, sometimes we're not fully aware of all the different moving parts that are happening in different communities and different organizations. So part of my presentation here, focusing on small businesses, is to give you guys a little bit of a lens in terms of what's actually happening. There's many different pockets within our community, and in those pockets, people are not just living in those communities, but people are also operating their businesses. There's different areas and places where people go and congregate. You might not be aware of that because it might not be where you go and socialize, or where you go shopping, or where you go and interact. Within our communities, there are small businesses that operate within those communities, and those community businesses are a critical part of the different sub-communities that are located. So often when we think about small businesses, we tend to think of small businesses based on small businesses that we interact with. We don't think about small businesses in terms of small businesses that are out there that we might not be interacting with on a regular basis. So the reason why I bring that context is because in order to be inclusive, you have to consider others. You have to be able to include those you might not be aware of. So the first part, it starts with awareness. So as you guys are part of leaders and businesses within our community, it's important for you to figure out what else is out there, right? If you go to the same restaurants for lunch or for dinner, you might not know that there's other restaurants around that are owned and operated by BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And So when an issue occurs or there is a crisis, like the crisis that we've been on within the last 9 months, when people start saying, oh, we need to support small businesses, right away in your mind, you're thinking of the small businesses that you've interacted with. You might not be thinking about the small businesses that other communities benefit and leverages on a daily basis. So one of the reasons why I bring that up, it's because it's very, very important to understand that there's different ecosystems within our communities that are operating on a regular basis. And those ecosystems have, vibrant businesses that are providing for their families, but it's also providing for the community as a whole. And it's hard to put that in a box, right? Because most of us might think, oh yeah, there's probably bodegas and small, shops. There might be beauty salons, or there might be, but there's different types of minority-owned businesses that are around. And one of the things that I've done since COVID, it's been supporting many small businesses around different challenges that they've been experiencing in order to make sure that they also access resources that are presented. In doing so, a lot of different folks started to reach out to me. So I started to learn that there's several construction companies, there's several landscaping companies that are owned by people of color. There's painters, there's insurance companies that are owned by a Bhutanese family. So part of that is being aware and getting to know what else is out there. And I think for you guys as community leaders and business leaders, it's super important to be able to expand your connection and your relationships beyond just your regular kind of day-to-day businesses that you engage with on a regular basis. One of the things I wanted to touch on, it's specifically around kind of the impact of COVID and what has happened that kind of highlighted some of these gaps in terms of connectivity and relationships. So when the PPP came out initially, the banks were very quick to reach out to businesses that they had relationships with, especially first time around. Most of you would know that, those fundings ran out fairly quick. So depending on a CPA that you had and the requirements you're able to demonstrate to the banks determines if you got qualified or not. A lot of the small businesses that I was working with that reached out to me, then I started to create content around explaining what PPP was, what the IDL SBA loan was, and how to fill out and apply for unemployment. I started to notice that they did not have strong institutional relationships with some of the institutions that you have relationship with. So a good example, like banks or CPAs. So they didn't even, most of the businesses that I was working with initially, they didn't even know that the PPP even existed. And another example is when the Main Street Fund was released. A lot of folks that I was working with didn't even know that the Main Street Fund was out there. When they eventually learned about the PPP, which was the second time around when it was announced that the second round was coming, most people confused the Main Street Fund with PPP. So therefore, they didn't even apply for it. They didn't even know that it existed. So these gaps gets elevated when we are in a crisis. And it's very important when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's about having that connection with the entire representation that's within the community where you reside. And those connections starts from relationship building. And that relationship building really starts from curiosity and having a sense of going out of your way in order to learn about what else is out there. And then when you form relationships, you're able to identify, what are the different moving parts. And especially when there is a crisis, you know how to go back and say, hey, we want to support you. We want to reach out to you. So after the middle of the summer on, my consulting firm ended up building a partnership with the Chambers of Commerce and the City of Manchester around the Small Business Resilient Grant. And part of that partnership, I knew that we needed to take an equitable approach around some of the qualification and understanding the needs for people to actually qualify in order for them to get the grant. So working with the chambers in the city, I was able to assess the different criteria that were put in place. And right away, I realized language was a big thing. So we had to make sure that any of the content that was publicized needed to be presented in the proper language. But the other thing that I realized was that we needed to contextualize some of the documentation that was needed. So it wasn't just saying, hey, you need to have a DUN number. You needed to explain what a DUN number is and what's the benefit of having a DUN number. We needed to explain around a profit and loss statement. You need to present a profit and loss statement. And I realized that some folks didn't have a typical traditional profit and loss system. So we needed to create a template of what a profit and loss statement looks like so people can be able to provide those documentation. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because I think that, you know, most of the small businesses, minority owned, that I've worked with, and this is not a true representation of all small businesses, so I just want to be clear on that. It wasn't that they were in need, right? It wasn't that some of the businesses that we were working with, they were doing well. They have reliable customers in their community that constantly go for their businesses. They were thriving, they were doing great. But one of the things that happened was it was being able to connect directly when some of those prerequisites were being asked regarding some of the documentation. That's when you saw that, oh, wow, this person doesn't have a CPA, or this person doesn't have this. This person completely focused on their operation, but now they're in need and they're now qualifying around some of the same resources that are out there. A similar organization that might be owned by a white person is qualifying for. So those are some of the barriers. And I think it's important when we start thinking about our small business ecosystem that we're not just thinking about the typical businesses that we go to, that we have the ability to understand a little bit more. What are other businesses that are around? And a good way to do that, there's so many different groups and organizations that are tied to our communities that will help redirect you to some of the small businesses that are around. And it's very, very important to be able to do that so that when we're in a crisis, or not even in a crisis, right? It's good to know what else is out there because we're all part of the same community. And, you know, the money that flows within the community ends up, you know, contributing to the, you know, the economy of our city. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. And thank you for giving me a chance to be able to share with you guys. And if you have questions, feel free to ask some of those questions at the end or contact me directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Deo. So you touched on so many great points. You I think really highlighted the challenges, the issues that you've seen in working with businesses, minority-owned businesses, and talked a bit about what other businesses can do. You mentioned and finding out what businesses are out there that are minority-owned businesses, and I just put into the chat a link, and this is something that Carrie mentioned earlier, that Citizens is now helping us fund this effort. We have a list of minority-owned businesses across the state that is at this link, and our project is to build that list. We know we don't have all the businesses on that list who are minority-owned in the state. So we want to build this list and to be able to provide assistance, the same kind of assistance that Deo has been providing to the folks that he's working with, to businesses all across the state.
James, I just wanted to share a video real quick. I forgot to share that video, and I think this is a good glue to end kind of what I was talking about. If you don't mind, it's only a couple of seconds.
Okay. Let's see. Do we need to make you co-host?
Yeah, I think I can share it. I'm already in there. So,
okay, go for it.
So this video that I'm sharing right now, I'm actually sharing it right out of my Facebook. It's a family that I've known for a very long time. The guy who the family owns a barbershop. They've been operating the barbershop for the last, I believe, over 20 years. Or one of the probably the first ethnic barbershop in Manchester. There's been two. Eddie's was the first, and then Latino Styles was the second one. But last year, prior to COVID and everything that was happening, Eddie's wife they ended up buying a convenience store that was down the street from where they operated. And they turned that convenience store into a takeout restaurant and a little boutique there. And one of the things that we did, I realized that, sometimes when a new business opens up in a community, the union leader or, a different outlet might do a little article on them. And I've been tracking the whole entire time since they've been renovating. And at one point they needed to remove the gas line that was there. So it took a long time. So when they opened, it was like really exciting. So I told Eddie, I'm going to come in and just video your shop. So I went in and I videoed the shop. The wife, she was so excited to be in the video, and I shared the video through social media, and that video was shared over 100 times organically. And so many different people said, oh, I didn't know. Oh, that's what happened to that space. That's what happened. I'm so excited to go. So many different people went within that first month and a half since they'd opened because of the notification and being able to broadcast that this store is open, this restaurant is there. So I'm going to share the video real quick, just so you can get a little sense, because I feel like a lot of us are not engaging with different community members for us to understand what are the different businesses that are out there. So here's that video real quick. I'm going to share it right through my Facebook. So here it is. Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Deo. I'm here in this amazing food market that just opened up. My good friend Eddie and his wife, they opened this place up. It's a market right here for the community. Check it out. But then also there's a food place. There's a restaurant here. And I'm here with Eddie's wife. Can you please tell us? Market, Sabrosa Restaurant. Awesome. And it's located at 353 Maple Street, the corner of Lake Ave and Maple. Come and visit. There's delicious food, delicious drinks, and come and check it out. Support the community. Anyways, that's it. That's all I had to share.
Great, thank you, Deo. And it'd be, if you could put in the chat the link to that video. I think we didn't quite hear it. We kind of heard a little bit, but I think others would want to hear more of what you said. So if you could put the link in the chat, that would be great. And I think just to highlight something you said, Deo, and to the last question we have, what can businesses do to help with the effort? Just as Deo said, get to know these businesses, frequent them, and spread the word that they exist, just like you would with any other businesses that you interact with and are aware of. So thanks for that. And as we said, we're going to leave a little bit of time toward the end here for our overall Q&A wrap up. So if you don't have any questions in your head now, but something comes up as the other folks are talking, please keep that in mind, and we'll come back to it. So next, I'd like to invite Shalimar to come into the picture and talk about those three questions from your perspective. First of all, sharing what you see as the major issues in education in our city with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, thank you, James. I just want to thank you, James, for inviting me to this, and also the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. I'm just proud to say I'm also a leadership Greater Manchester graduate of the class of 2020, and I'm very excited to be here. So in addressing these three questions, I go ahead, the first one, just go over these questions again, what you see the major issues in the early education and diversity, equity, and inclusion, what are the common misconceptions we often see, and what can we do to help the effort. First of all, I want to say that working with the NAACP, the Education Committee, we have been working in conjunction with the Manchester Public School District and the School Board Policy Committee to help eliminate a lot of what we're seeing as the systemic racial disparities and inequities by removing barriers such as deleveling, and also helping to identify how to diversify the hiring practices. We're currently seeing that a lot of students of color they're more disciplined, they're more absent, and they have the lower accessibility to AP classes, the advanced placement classes. Just real quick story, my daughter Angelica, she's 22 now, but when she was in high school, she wanted to join the AP classes. And what happened with that was that She was able to do so. My daughter is a cancer survivor, and so she had cancer in 8th grade. So she was kind of a little bit behind, but she pulled herself up by her bootstraps, and every year she would just do extra things to be able to get ahead. And what ended up happening is she did get into an AP class, and one of the classes that she was in before, she went from like level 2 to level 3 to level 4, and she made it into the AP classes. And one of the teachers from before was like, "You don't belong here." They just told her, "You don't belong here." And that was very disconcerting for her. And it's just shows a lot, is that there wasn't an expectation that she, as a Latina young lady, would be able to get into advanced placement classes. But one of the things we're also seeing is that there's higher issues related with remote learning that have not necessarily been created, but just uncovered. We're seeing that a lot of the kids, they don't have the devices, they don't have internet access, they don't really even know how to use a lot of the Google Docs and a lot of the technology that's required. The parents don't know how to help them because they are either maybe English limited, or even if they speak English, I got to tell you, I speak really good English, but Google Docs and me, we don't get along. And so there's a lot of issues on being able to help the parents, not just be able to access those things, but also accessing the Aspen student portal, the parent portal, email use to be able to communicate with the teachers. Not all parents have use email all the time. I have like 7 different Gmails, but some people don't really use Gmail as their main form of communication. So being able to help these parents to be able to help their students is one of the things that we're seeing, that we're having to meet these parents where they're at to help them. We're also seeing that there's multiple people we're working with multiple people in the school district, teachers and staff, to help address these issues, to go over the data, how these students are currently doing right now during remote learning. This has just been a very difficult issue all around. I'm sure this is nationwide, and probably even globally. It's not just something we're dealing with here in Manchester, but these are things that we in the city, we can do, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the question of the common misconception, what do people assume wrongly about what's going on and what I've been talking about? So many people have assumed that everyone has internet, device access as well, and that everyone has the tech skills. Well, I will tell you this, we're finding out that not everybody has internet. Comcast internet has not been something that everybody has access to. There have been things that we're dealing with to try to work with them, to try to be able to get accessibility to all the students. Some places, excuse me, they're just not able to get the cable in there. So maybe they'll need to use other things, such as maybe cell phone data, things like that. So as we saw in the slide that James showed on the equality and equity, removing the barriers is actually the best way to include all people. So we just need to remove the barriers that are affecting our students and parents so we can help them, especially during this time. Another assumption that people make is that the school district has all the answers and is just refusing to implement it, and that the district has had this data all along and accessible, which is not the case. So they have been working a lot in trying to get the data out. Recently, they just came out with Q1 data. And now that we're seeing is that there's a lot of disparities. We're seeing actually the Hispanic population is very high. I think it's over 50-something%, in which they're failing at least one class. Why? We have to look into why this is happening. This is contributed, for not having this data all along. It's contributed to the districts now having to rush to get the data inputted to be able to accurately see what's going on, be able to do comparisons to last year. These COVID times are just really redefining how we do the teaching and learning and just life in general. So one of the things that I ask in the very last question is what can businesses and the Chamber of Commerce members do? And what we can do is quite a bit, actually. One is, talk to your circles, talk to people. We should all be rethinking education right now and coming up with ways to eliminate the barriers. I mean, we live in New Hampshire. We have amazing education opportunities here in not just our city, but our state. And we need to just come up with ways to remove the barriers so that we can reach our kids where they're at, to be able to help them not just get by, but also to thrive, to reach their potentials, support, and also connect with other organizations like the NAACP, the Manchester Mayor's Multicultural Advisory Council. Try to join on there on the education committee as well to see how you can come alongside and use your skills to help. And the thing is that this is an urgent and an immediate need, and we all need to join forces to help create feasible, sustainable, and equitable solutions. I think this is something that we can do. It's something that needs to be done. We really, really need to be putting forth all our efforts to help our kids. These are difficult times. I was just speaking with a kid yesterday, a 9th grader in high school. He needs tutoring. So there's actually it's called the Manchester Action Coalition. They meet once a month, and they also have been able to put together a tutorial program to help. It's free. They're working with other colleges to provide tutors, and they have the tutors, but they need the students to sign on. And I can provide that link in the chat room later. But we're trying to connect these students who are like failing at some of these classes because they're having such a hard time, connect them with tutors. So there are ways and things, even the smallest thing can help. So we put our heads together, we can do this.
Thank you, Shalimar. And you know, to the point of the internet access, Robert just typed in the chat, we have a lot of tenants who are struggling to pay for internet, and the free and discounted program from Comcast is only available if you've been a customer for 90 days. And this is something we've actually been working on. So I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about that, and maybe we can connect with Robert to understand who his tenants are and help give them some help. But you want to say a little bit about that?
So one of the things that we've been dealing with is that, and I realized this a while back, I myself, I tried to call and say, you know what, I'm no longer getting the, unemployment. So I need to go down to the $10 a month. And I called, and they're like, oh, well, sorry, you don't qualify because you've been paying your bill all along and you've had internet with us all along. Yeah, doesn't matter what you're going through, doesn't matter, it's COVID. Yeah, you don't qualify. You need to be without internet for 3 months. Without internet from Comcast for 3 months to even qualify. And so this is something we've been working with Comcast. I guess they had been spoken to and they were going to remove that barrier, but it wasn't. And so that has been something that we're still working with to try to see if the school system and Comcast can connect and try to come up with something to eliminate that barrier altogether, because Comcast is one of the best internets there are. There are other options as well. There are T-Mobile and other places that are offering hotspots. So it seems like there is a lot of businesses are trying to help out with this. But right now, Comcast is like the #1 thing that most people have, and we're hoping to be able to get that barrier removed.
Right. So working on that, and as we've been talking, even to help address the need to pay for this, we're thinking about, we have some funding, maybe we'll even just pay for internet access for some of these families, because it's just taken so long to go through the official channels to try to resolve this. We need to solve this now for folks.
I agree.
So thank you, Shalimar, for your comments and for being here. And now I'd love to have Victoria come on and talk from a public health perspective about the major issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and misconceptions, and what businesses, particularly businesses here in the Chamber, can do. So Victoria, your thoughts?
Absolutely. And James, thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to the entire Chamber team for having me as part of this powerful conversation. And a special thank you to the other panelists. This has been such an affirming morning to just think about how there are so many intersections between what all of us are seeing and experiencing each day. And so, as James said, I am coming to you as a public health practitioner. And for public health, we are really thinking about the health of populations and communities as opposed to individuals. And of course, reoccurring theme, it's impossible to talk about challenges in public health today, December 9th, without talking about COVID-19, and specifically in the context of health equity and the disproportionate impact for people of color right in our own community. And so I'll give just a really quick primer on health equity. I think James did a beautiful job at the beginning of our time together, really outlining this idea, but we're really thinking about health equity as the idea that everyone, regardless of their background, their race, their religion, their ethnicity, has the opportunity to live a long and healthy life. And to do that, we are recognizing that that's not currently the case, right? That in our community, as well as across the United States, there are environmental and societal conditions that put certain people at risk and at greater risk of poor health outcomes. If we think about this as kind of a chronic disadvantage, and those factors include everything we've discussed so far: race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and the like. And so important for our conversation today is something that Dr. Trini Tejas from the Office of Health Equity actually said years ago that has stuck with me until today. And it's if we want to improve the health of a person or of a family, the fastest way to do that is to get them a safe, well-paying job. And so a lot of my reflections today are going to be about this connection of health and overall well-being and income, that I actually can't overstate how important this is. And it's part of the reason a lot of the work that I've had the honor to do for the City of Manchester Health Department has been grounded in what our director, Anna Thomas, calls creating neighborhoods of opportunity. And so my work specifically has been around using a community school model to create leverage points, right, for residents to access this social, community, educational resources. Think about everything from high-set training to parenting classes, ESL classes, all of these things. And it really, our goal is helping families lift themselves out of cycles of poverty. There is no one who is a better expert at surviving every day in our communities, especially in our historically marginalized and vulnerable communities, than the people there themselves. And so how do we give them the tools to do the work and value their expertise as stakeholders in making sure that them and their children have the best possible future? And again, poverty, we think of it as this driving force in health equity, right? So along with racism, which we've talked about, which exists in institutions, policies, and symptoms. And again, nothing new here, but we know that the most racially and ethnically diverse parts of the city are also struggling with the worst health outcomes. If you look at a map of where violence is concentrated, challenging housing stock is concentrated, it's the exact same parts of the city where our health outcomes related to asthma and diabetes and heart disease are the worst. And for public health practitioners like myself, it's boggling that in the United States we pay or we spend over $3.5 trillion on healthcare. That's close to 20% of our GDP, when 80% of what actually impacts your health is not that annual visit to your doctor's office, right? It's the quality of the air you breathe, the house or the apartment that you live in, the food and opportunities for physical activity that you have access to, the level of safety in your neighborhood, your personal stress level. And so much of that is really determined by income and employment. And so another thing that if I had $1 for every time this has been said, I would be wealthy, is that this moment has not created inequities or disparities. My other fabulous panelists have already described this. These moments were only exacerbated by COVID-19, right? Some groups were always at a disadvantage in achieving best health status, right? This moment has just revealed them. And a perfect example is really the conversation around essential workers that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And so people of color, again, are overrepresented compared to their white counterparts in our lower socioeconomic tiers. And so these tiers see greater participation in what we might call the gig economy, right? Jobs like a grocery store employee, an Uber driver, the individuals who are delivering all of our holiday packages right now, all of those things. And many of those jobs may or may not offer benefits like health insurance, like sick time. And at the same time, those individuals are also more likely than white populations at baseline in New Hampshire to have comorbidities like diabetes and heart disease, right? And that is a huge factor in terms of environment. Where people live has a direct impact on their health, as we've already described. And so that means that for the individuals, if they do contract COVID-19, they are also the exact same ones who are more likely to be hospitalized or suffer death. from the disease. And so this just continues to kind of to be so impactful for me, that the greatest people at risk are also the ones that are most likely to have exposure to the disease. And again, income, employment is such a huge factor there. And so just like there are economic drivers for the problem, we really believe that there are also economic drivers for the solution. And I want to mention a few things that have happened recently. So the governor's COVID-19 equity response team actually put out a report back in July. And one of the recommendations was establishing and funding community-led public-private partnerships to identify and implement strategies that address unemployment, job creation, fiscal loss, financial insecurity, all of these things that we're really seeing as a result from COVID-19. And those tie-ins, and I think this also ties in a little bit to kind of the common misconception piece, right, is that the public health and business, I heard someone call it almost like strange bedfellows, that there's been some challenge when we think about the business sector as well as the public health sector. And something I love that the Harvard-Chan School of Public Health has been doing over the last few months is this kind of crossover health business series. And a huge takeaway there is kind of also what I've just described, right? The consequences of the disease for those who are suffering most are also the same groups that are suffering the most from economic pain points, right? Some of the small and medium-sized businesses that many of you are familiar with having to lay off or furlough staff. It's odd. Unfortunately, the staff that go first are often the ones who may have been there for the least amount of time, who may not be in management, and many of those folks, unfortunately, come from communities of color. And this, I have a special kind of skin in the game on this one, because part of my work currently, all of us at the Public Health Department have really been deployed to the front lines in some capacity of the response from Manchester to COVID-19. And so part of my work every day is talking to families and walking them through that moment that they got a text from their hairdresser that they saw last week and that found out that person is now positive, or they work in a restaurant and they just found out that a coworker came back with a positive test over the weekend, or their child had a runny nose at daycare yesterday and now they can't go back to school without a positive test. And I don't know about you, but I'm not familiar with a lot of people who can be out the 10 days of a child or a family member's isolation and then the additional 10 to 14 days for their own quarantine, right? That's almost 3 weeks. And if you do not have sick leave, if you don't have other social safety nets to support you, there are very few people who can go without pay for 3 weeks at a time. And so something that I wonder from the public health perspective is how can we collaborate better about talking about and creating these systems, right? How do we talk about the availability of childcare for folks to be able to go back to work? How do we talk about using CARES Act funding or other funding mechanisms around sick time? How do we talk about that substantively in ways that mitigate inequities, keep people safe, and at the same time support the business sector? Right. And kind of the other place that my mind goes immediately is that over the last few months, I think from the public health perspective, especially, we've really learned that the messenger matters. I've heard some people talk about it a little bit almost as if there's a crisis of trust, unfortunately, that there are public health messages that people may or may not receive from a government department that they never knew existed before and had no impact on their life before the beginning of March of this year, so they thought. But there are messages that they might receive from their mechanic or the person who's behind the plexiglass at the counter of their favorite coffee shop, because that is a relationship of trust that has been built over years. And so something that I would really love to see the business community do as we are in this moment is harnessing that power of trust, that power of relationship, for businesses to start saying the same thing, and many of you are, right? Saying the same thing as the public health community is. How do we communicate with your customers, with your clients about hand washing and mask wearing and social distancing? How do we refute myths about the vaccine when it becomes available in the next few months? And we believe that this will not just keep people safe and well and mitigate the loss of life, which of course is paramount, but we also believe that we can see major impact on lowering the rates of infection. And if we can lower the rates of infection, we can reduce restrictions. And if we can reduce restrictions, that is greater ability for businesses to be able to return in some sense to their original business model. And so I really feel like there are so many connection points for public health and business. And again, I just continue to be so excited to be part of this conversation. So thank you so much, James.
Thank you, Victoria. And you've kind of pulled together so many of the threads that we've been talking about during this time we have together. And just thank you so much for that. And now it's time for our Q&A period. And I just noticed there was one question about the Diversity Workforce Coalition, which you are a part of. So if you want to share a little bit about what DWC is about and what it can provide to businesses who are listening here.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for that lead in, James. So I was part of the Diversity Workforce Coalition for almost 6 years. I just termed off, but I continue to be very close and a huge partner and advocate in that work. And so the Diversity Workforce Coalition is a group often of HR professionals, but it really spans industry at this point. There are representatives from academia, from the nonprofit sector, from government, and it really is a coalition built on the idea that diversity and inclusion is best for everyone. Equity works for everyone. And so one of the things that I think is so powerful in that space specifically is this idea that we want to see New Hampshire as the most diverse and inclusive place for folks to be able to work, to raise their family, because number one, we know that we in our population, in terms of population growth, we need individuals who want to come and make New Hampshire their home and join our labor force. And number two, that work is best done together. And so the DWC offers training, it offers opportunities for folks to come together with thought leaders about how they can bring diversity and inclusion principles to their organization. And my favorite part is that it really has a strong component of peer relationship. And so if I'm in manufacturing, I may not necessarily want to hear from someone who's in public health, but there are other folks in manufacturing who might be great partners to talk about, to mentor, to show how diversity and inclusion works. And so I think we always in this work, we know there's that ethical, moral aspect of it, but there also is a real bottom line aspect too, that the businesses who are competitive in terms of diversity of thought, of individual, of perspective, are the highest performing. And so I love that is an organization that brings both of those worlds together.
Great, thank you, Victoria. So it's time for our Q&A, and we have, let's see, Peter Neves has raised his hand. Peter, do you have a question you want to come off mute and ask?
Hey, James, how are you?
Pretty well, hey.
Peter Nieves, I'm a shareholder at She Infinity Bass and Green. 100% Puerto Rican from Brooklyn, love New Hampshire, don't intend to leave. So with that being said, I also know Victoria very well. She's an amazing person, and a number of the people here. So I just want to kind of add something to what Victoria just said, because it's a really important issue that I don't think a lot of people really understand is, yeah, there's the ethical consideration with regard to diversity, which is important, but a lot of businesses out there are just saying, well, who cares? Like, who cares? Okay, there's a group of people that really care about diversity, but why should I care? And I think something that's really important to understand at the corporate level is they're anticipating by the year 2040, numbers like 35% of the business community will be Hispanic and increased numbers of the Black community. So if we, in fact, are not considering these issues merely by the fact that it's the ethical thing to do, you actually provide a more diverse environment. People do you know, the soup tastes a lot better when there's more flavors and more ingredients in it. You know, there's a lot of things that are very valuable. If we decide not to partake in this, not to get aggressively involved in trying to support each other and to increase diversity in New Hampshire, then financially, people's bottom dollar will be hurt. People will feel it because there is an increase in the Hispanic and Black community in New Hampshire even that is so high, and it's intending to grow. And so all of these service providers, you're gonna have to know how to actually work with these individuals. And that doesn't just mean speak Spanish. That means understand the culture, understand what's different and what these individuals are actually confronted with and how they have to adapt. And these are not just your service providers. We're talking about business leaders, ones who are building corporations, ones who are building a lot of different things. So I just want to applaud the efforts of people here, but also highlight that fact that this is an issue that we need to address, not just because of an ethical issue. This is something that, even if you don't consider that, you're going to feel it financially. So I just wanted to add that, and just thank you all for your time. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Peter. And it's so spot on. And in my work with organizations, this is a key concept, that it is in their bottom line best interest to deal with this. By 2040, the population of the United States is estimated to turn over from majority white to majority minority, what's minority now. So
that's exactly right.
How do you deal with that as a business? How does your business market change when that
if
happens?
I could just say one quick thing on the legal community, because I obviously am a lawyer. So what we've done is we've built with the University of New Hampshire, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Scholarship Fund. It's never existed before. 100% of all the funds that are contributed to that will go directly to minority students who are demonstrating a financial need. So if you have the means to help out, I'll send it into the chat. You can reach out to Maria at the University of New Hampshire Law Center. It's the only law school in New Hampshire. And so if you want to see the number of the diversity in law students increase and the number of lawyers increase and become more diverse, this is a great way you can help in that area. 100% of all the funds go directly there, and it's all tax deductible. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your efforts.
Great, thank you, Peter. And I think the whole criminal justice area and law enforcement is possibly a topic that we'll cover in another one of these sessions. As many of you know, I served on the Governor's Commission on Law Enforcement Accountability, Transparency, and Community. And there's so much that we can talk about there, and so much we need to be able to do to improve how we treat people equity around the state. So thank you for
that.
Right,
and it covers all areas of law. It's not just criminal, it's like corporate formation, it's wills and trusts, it's everything. It's healthcare, like Victoria was talking about. You know, people need to know how to help them. So it's every area, just like with every other category. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Peter. So we are at 11:26, and we could, of course, go on for hours and hours and hours, but we want to be respectful of folks' time. So I think I just want to close here by thanking Deo and Shalimar and Victoria for spending the time here to share their experiences and their expertise in the areas of small business and education and public health. And I want to thank you all for participating. We try to make this somewhat interactive, and we'll continue along that line, because we know that people learn more with interaction rather than just being lectured at. So thank you, and please spread the word about this event, and spread the word about the effort that the Chamber is undertaking, and about the other organizations you've heard of here today. And I will close with my NAACP hat on to say, and I think this has been said by others, please find your passion in these areas we're talking about. Join an organization who is working on these issues. Provide your financial support, provide other resources that your organization can bring to bear. because it's only through all of us coming together that we're going to create this equitable community that's going to benefit all of us as we go forward. So I'll turn it over to Mike for some closing remarks from the chamber perspective.
Thanks, James. I want to first thank you, James, for serving as moderator and really, I think, guiding a really great conversation, informative conversation. Also want to echo your remarks in thanking Deo, Shalimar, and Victoria for being wonderful panelists and just offering a really important perspective. And just to close, I think so many wonderful, important perspectives shared here, really eye-opening for the chamber and our membership. And I think, to underscore one aspect of that is we're at this really challenging time in our community with COVID-19 that has impacted all of us in some way and impacted many in our community much more significantly than others. And I think as we move forward in the months ahead and navigate the impacts of COVID-19, it's really imperative that our recovery from this crisis, lifts up and supports and is accessible to all members of our community equally. And I think that was an important part of the conversation. It should be an important part of the conversation going forward. And we look forward to being part of that. I want to again thank our sponsors, Citizens, SNHU, Any Property Rehab, Fidelity Investments, Wells Fargo, and Manchester Boston Regional Airport. Thank you again for your support. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and being part of this session. Really appreciate it. We had a really great response and participation. The recording of this program will be available, and we'll be sure to share that in some follow-up communications. So please share it far and wide, and also participate in that survey that we're going to share afterwards so we can help formulate some action steps and ideas on how to keep the conversation going. So again, thank you, James, Victoria, Shalimar, Deo, for your participation, support. Really great conversation this morning. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a great day. Thanks all.